it's Pastor Dan from Dexter Gospel Church with another Proverbs Practical. Thanks for watching. Today we find another reason to turn away from wrath. We're in Proverbs 27, verse 3. And Proverbs 27:3 says, "A stone is heavy, and the sand weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than them both." So if you're trying to weight something down, to this day, these are two of the most popular things you can do it with, rocks and sand. But rather than a paperweight or a sandbag, this verse presents those two things as being a problem. The way this is worded emphasizes the weight of both of those things. If you're trying to clear a field or a construction site, which would be the kind of interaction most people that Solomon writes this to would have, remember he's trying to build a temple and farmers are constantly clearing land, and there are stones there on that site, it is a pain to move them. They don't have mechanized machinery or anything. It's all got to be done with muscle and leverage and animals. Strikingly, sand is probably even more difficult to move because it shifts and moves and sifts and still weighs a ton when there's a lot of it. Anyone who's been forced to deal with stones or sand knows how laborious and backbreaking they are to deal with. But this verse isn't making a point about labor difficulties, construction and farming. It's talking about moral and life difficulties. And it says that dealing with the wrath of a fool is even harder than moving stones and sand. Wrath, of course, is one of those behaviors we're constantly warned against, urged to avoid and turn away from. But the fool doesn't care that God said to forsake wrath, back in Psalm 37:8. He doesn't care that judgment belongs to God. He's concerned with himself and how he feels and what he wants and how he thinks, not the effect that his behavior has on the people he's around or behaving towards. He doesn't realize that the swiftness and obviousness of his wrath actually mark him as a fool, since Proverbs 12:16 tells us that a fool's wrath is presently known. Ultimately, the fool in Proverbs is not a moral person. He doesn't live by the fear of God and the rejection of doing wrong. He doesn't live by love and Christ-like character. And this spills out into his emotions and his behavior. And so just as stones and sand create a back-breaking, burdensome difficulty for people who have to deal with them, so the wrath of a fool is incredibly difficult to deal with for the people around him. In fact, it's worse than those things. It's even harder to move, even harder to deal with. The people around the fool probably end up developing tools and techniques to deal with his wrath, just as workmen who have to move heavy rocks or large quantities of sand and develop tools and techniques for doing that. But having tools doesn't make the job go away and doesn't mean that it's easy. That wrath just makes everything more difficult. And the wrath of a fool, I think, is a burden to him too. Where the people around him each have to deal with it some of the time, he has to deal with it and its consequences every time he loses his temper and indulges himself in wrath. It creates a burden, something that he's carrying around all the time that seems to slowly warp his very nature, like carrying heavy loads all the time seems to stoop the back and hurt the joints of those who do that. So how do we apply this? First, don't be the fool. And be careful about thinking that it's okay for you to be angry and wrathful because you're convinced you're not a fool. Unchecked anger and wrath are one of the key identifiers of a fool. The godly person is almost never going to display wrath because God told us to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. When evangelist Micah Self was with us a few months ago, he pointed out in his comments on love that patience is one of the key markers of love. It suffers long, it's kind, along with other qualities that all lead back to what we think of as patience. But secondly, recognize that dealing with other people's wrath is difficult. Where it can be avoided, it probably should be avoided. It's just one more reason not to yoke ourselves to fools. We might help and witness to them, but the less influence they have over us, whether it's in a work setting or any other setting, the easier things are going to be. And when we do have to deal with their wrath, we might have to learn some techniques, develop some tools, and dig in for the long haul and some serious work, because it's not going to be easy. Yet of all the foolish behaviors we humans often sink into, it might be that wrath is not the most destructive and difficult to deal with. We'll see another that might be even more destructive in our next video. I hope this video is a help to you. If it is, give it a like. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more like it. Until next time, I hope you stay well and live patiently.